Welcome to this new hangout with Eric Bishard from Couchbase. If you cannot hear me, let me know in the comment section. I'll send a message just in case you cannot hear me.
Yep. How you guys doing?
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Very good. I was going to just kind of go over the format a little bit. It seemed like when you invited me, the idea is that we have a lot of React Europe or React developers that we just want to check in with and do a hangout and kind of see what they're working on, see what they're up to. And so I have two things today that I can show you that I'm working on that I've been checking out. One is a Recoiljs, which we debuted or announced at React Europe, as you can see by their little video here on their page as well. So we'll walk through an app, kind of show how to get that working. And then I'll show everyone an app that I'm working on as a developer advocate at Couchbase, which is a full stack JavaScript application, which is just a shallow dive into kind of the server, the client, the database, and GraphQL and kind of how all that works together. It's not a deep dive. It's a little shallow into every part of it. Is that kind of what we're... Okay, cool. I guess
just before we get started, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask on the Discord channel or on the YouTube comment section. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as it helps us get more visibility and more great content for you. Okay, I will let you start, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to be here. So like we said, Recoiljs was released or kind of made aware of last week at React Europe. And so what I was going to do is pull down an application of mine that I call it React App Base, and I use it for several projects of mine. And basically what this app does is I like to try and roll my own Webpack Babel React application myself. I use Create React App, especially for quick demos and stuff, but this is an application, a repo that I have up on GitHub where I can clone this down and I kind of have a full application frame to get started with. So the interesting thing about Recoil, and let me just tell you a little bit about Recoil real quick, and if you're not familiar with it, the place that I would start if I were you, which I'm not even accepting my own advice here because I haven't done it yet, but I just went through it while we were waiting, and they have a getting started and a to-do, I guess it's a to-do app that you'll build kind of step by step. And I really suggest that if you haven't played with React with Recoil before, to walk through that getting started application. One of the things, let's go ahead and get this thing opened up here. Let me find out which screen this opened up on. Here we go. So one of the things that I have, I'm going to walk through this app really quickly and just kind of give you an idea. I'll also let a few people trickle in. Again, this application, we'll start with the app.js. So what I like to do in my applications is I have on the app page, I like to try to do as very little as possible. And what this app page is reserved for me is to set up some type of a context API to wrap around the rest of my application. And we'll take a look at Frame really quickly. So here you have the whole layout of my application. So we have the React router kind of wrapping the entire thing. And again, another use of context API here, the browser router wraps your entire project and it gives us access to data that's specific to React router. Like the thing that I use the most that comes out of that, I guess, is the being able to match what's in the address bar, what's in the query parameters. So we have this kind of separation between app and the rest of my application. And what this app provider right here does is it's basically the context API for my application. So let's open that up real quick and take a look at it. So here we have, and I'm going to point out a few things that's different between this and using Recoiljs so far that I've seen, that because Recoiljs is in a sense, it's a replacement kind of for using the context API, and the way that I'm doing it here. Recoiljs, from what I understand, uses context API underneath the hood. So all of these things like tracking, like whether my nav is open or my side nav is opened or closed, I track here. And what the current theme is, I track here. So one interesting kind of deviation with using context API is that you, when you define all this stuff, you're inside of a React component. And so that means you can do interesting things like call other React hooks. You can use, and in that, you can use effect. Now, one thing that I realized immediately using Recoiljs is that it's not kind of set up in the same way, and I got to find another way to do these things when I'm using that. And you'll see more whenever I start walking through the app and trying to convert my app from using context API in the manner that I am here to using Recoiljs. And if you're familiar with React and you're familiar with basic application setup in context API in the way that you use it with hooks, you'll be very familiar with what I'm about to show you in my application. So the first place that I use data from this app provider is inside of my frame. So here inside of my frame, I am importing my app context. I am using it. I'm actually kind of using the context here. And then if we click on context here, you can see where I'm using the theme. So I have this wrapper around my entire application, a div. And what I like to do there is I like to state what the current breakpoint is, whether it's small or medium or large or whatever. As well, I like to tell what the current like light or dark theme is. So this will equate to the string light or dark. This will equate to the string small or medium in this specific application. And then I can use, and I'm using actually context theme here. I'm actually passing it into one of my components. So yeah, so that's one place that I'm using the context API. And the idea is that I can just kind of, in any component in my application, I can just reach into that magical cloud in the sky and pull out a value from my context API and use it. And any changes to that value will be propagated down through my app and my components through a subscription process, which I do not have to manage, which is another reason why I love React. And that I started using React was because of the one-way data flow, the way to use state, and all of this. We have a few other places in the application where I'm using this. One is on this About page. And we're going to be, again, this is a very, very light application. There's not a whole lot to it, but it's just enough to kind of show us how to work with Recoiljs. And I figured all this stuff out yesterday, so even I'm not an expert on Recoiljs. I don't think anyone is. And I've been looking for good sources on the web. So if you have those, put them into the comments and let us know about them. Most of them are going to show you similar to what I'm going to show you, but I'm going to show you in the context of a working application. So in my footer, I also use context, and I use one of those methods that I had defined in my context, right? So I have not only fields with values that I want to kind of track over time through my application, but also methods to be able to change that. And I'm just doing it very simply with use state, right? If I want to change and toggle the side nav, then somewhere inside of my application, I'm going to call context.toggle side nav. And that's going to set, it's going to use the set app function here to modify that state. And then I just have to tell it, hey, here's my data. Let's spread out the existing data. Let's change the nav open value to whatever I pass in. Same thing down here with change theme. Whenever I want to change the theme, maybe it starts at light, but when I want to flip the switch and change it to dark, it's going to call context.change theme, and it's going to pass it dark or light to go ahead and change that. A few other places that I have used it is in the menu. So when I click on, and let's go ahead and let's actually fire up the app really quick just to kind of see what we're working with here. And I'll adjust this so we can see better. All right. And Patrick, I'm gonna rely on you for any comments or any questions. I'm gonna try and run through the whole thing, both this demo and the next demo. And if there's any questions that are very pertinent to what we're doing, let me know. And let's find out if something's going wrong here. Oh, we've already got a problem. Oh, what happened? Did I change something? This card changes. Let's make sure that we ran npm install. That might have been the problem. Yeah, so if we have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can take questions afterwards. So what we're gonna walk through and do is we're going to basically make it to where we don't have to use this app context anymore, and that we can just use Recoiljs. Come on, demo gods. Let's not have a problem here. All right. Of course, no demo would be complete without errors. Oh, I know what the problem is. So I have NVM installed.
NVM install, yeah.
I think we're just gonna do NVM rebuild. I think what happened is that I switched back and forth between different node versions. And I think that the last time I built this, it was using a different version of node. Let's cross our fingers and hope that that was the situation there.
Do you use NVM?
Yes. Worst case scenario, I can still walk through the entire thing. There we go. That's all it was. Let me move this off the page. Perfect. So again, it's nothing major. We've got a home and about us page that's controlled using React Router. And if I flip the switch back and forth down here, using a little Kendo React switch, they were a sponsor of React Europe, so I decided I'd go ahead and continue using it on this demo as well. But as you can see here, as I switch the switch back and forth, what's happening is it's reaching into my context, and it's just changing this nav value from false to true. No big deal. Also, we have when we make this smaller, our navigation at the top disappears using some basic responsive. We're actually using a responsive media query hook that's allowing us to kind of determine what the size of the page is. And when it's above 600 pixels, we call it medium. When it's below 600 pixels, we call it small. And so when I click this menu icon here, we are toggling actually the nav open, true and false. And then I misspoke before. We were changing theme from light to dark. So that's how the context API is keeping track of global variables in my application. Now, in a full production application, you're probably going to have a lot more things that you want to track globally. But let's get right into this and actually start trying to change around. And just by watching me go through and removing everything that relies on context and using Recoiljs instead, you're going to get a really good feel of how to use it, at least from a very basic standpoint, from selectors to atoms and everything kind of in between. Now, atoms is a cool name for it, because if you think about what these atoms are really doing, they are just symbols like you would have in any computer programming language. So a symbol in computer programming is a primitive data type whose instances have a unique human readable form. I could read more from the wiki page, but that's all I'm going to say right now. That kind of makes sense for what we're doing when you see me start writing these atoms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file in here and call it app atoms, just because I don't really know what the best practice is for this. So I'm going to call it appatoms.js so that I can have it right here next to it. And in a sense, I'm normally, like when I first did this, I had this context API open or component open, and just kind of so I could see what I was doing before. And that kind of tells me how I need to create my atoms. Sorry, I'm moving the Zoom things off the screen so I can see. All right, so let's get right into it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import both atom and selector from Recoiljs. All right. And then what we need to do is we need to track our nav open and our theme with Recoil. Now, since I've already got these, I've already got variables in my application named nav open and theme. I'm going to call mine. Let's see. I'm going to do 2 of them at a time here so we can walk through this fastly. So, oops. So export const. And this is a little bit different than you'll see when other people have been previewing it, because I'm actually going to export this out so that because most of the examples so far that I've seen, they just have people including like everything into one code sandbox. And so they had the atoms right there on the page with all the other components. And I understand kind of what to do with that. But if someone's very new to React or even JavaScript, and they're trying to use something like this, then that can be, they may not know how to pull in those atoms into other pages. So what we need to do is we need to take the definition of all our atoms and put them in its own JS page and export each one of them using named exports. And that's what we're doing here. Each atom will have a key, and that will be a string. Don't forget to put this inside of a string or it will not work. And we're going to call ours nav open recoil and theme recoil. Again, because I have other things in my application, I want this to kind of stand out a little bit, and then I can go back and rename them later. And they will also have a default. So they have a key and a default. Very simple to kind of understand at first because there's not much to it. Now I'm going to rename this one here to, let's see here, theme recoil. And my default here, I'm just going to put as the string light. Now you might say, hey, Eric, over here in your context API, you were defining the default for theme based off of some logic that used a hook. And you're also changing local storage every time that one of those changes with this use effect. Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but for right now, I just want to keep it simple in here with that. So here we go. We've already created 2 atoms. We've done, to get up and started with Recoil, we've pretty much already done the things that the easiest thing to do, which is create an atom. The next thing we're going to do is create a, we'll do, let me think about, we'll do theme recoil text, theme text recoil. How about that? And what this is going to be is this going to be a derived value. Now, this is very simple way of kind of showing how to use one of these selectors. But in the end, a selector, all a selector is it's a derived value. And what it's going to do is it's going to, every time theme recoil changes, the atom theme recoil changes, I want to create an additional atom that I'll be able to reference from anywhere that has a derived value from that. So let's go ahead and do the key first. And so this is kind of like, just like what you do with the atoms, you name it, and we're going to call ours theme text recoil. Now, the next thing is we don't actually provide a default. What we do is we create a get field. And that's going to be a function, which basically we're just going to return, let's return the theme is, and then what we'll do is use some string interpolation, and we'll actually get that theme recoil. right? So we're going to get that atom. I believe, and I'm not sure because I'm very new to this, but I believe when you're creating a selector, that what you are in fact doing is you're creating an atom right here, but you're creating it through a derived value of another atom. I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of how I see this. All right. So the next thing I want to do is, so that's it. Like as far as the context stuff goes, that's all I have to do inside these atoms. And everything looks good, so I can pretty much close this out unless I have a problem with it. So now what we want to do is we want to start walking through the app and getting rid of all of the things that are app context related and just changing them. So what we'll do here is we'll do recoil root. And let's actually I guess we have to import that on our own. So we're going to do import recoil root from recoil. I'm pretty sure that's all we got to do on the app.js page, right? Because all we're doing is we're replacing that that context API component with recoil root. Recoil root is going behind getting my atoms and doing all that extra stuff that I was doing, using use state and all that stuff behind the scenes. It's probably using use reducer instead of use state like I was, but it's kind of doing all that boilerplate stuff for us. So now let's move on. What is the next page that uses it? Frame. So again, let's find the app context stuff. And just come in here and kind of remove it. And then down here where I'm using the context, what I'm going to do here instead is I'm going to say const theme and set theme equals use recoil state, right? So that brings in use recoil state for me. And then I want to say, which atom it's going to use. So I'm going to use, what do we call it? Theme recoil. And so what we should be able to do here is we'll import theme recoil from context app atoms. So now what we're doing when we use recoil state, that means that we not only want to use the value, but we also want to potentially change that value in some places. And you might say, well, we're not changing that value anywhere here. We weren't typically changing any values of theme in this file, but I'm going to now because I can't use the use effect and the things I showed you inside of my app context the way I could before. But first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of these context dots and just remove them. So that on its own, if I were to run the application right now, I might run into some errors, but if it worked, I would be getting that theme. I would be at least be getting that default theme value that I set already. What I want to do real quick is I want to go grab this use effect, and I'm going to use it here inside of my frame. And I'm going to modify it. I'm going to create two of these use effects. And so one of them is going to set and one of them is going to get. So first off, anytime that we change theme, we're going to want to go ahead and set our theme in local storage. And so we just get rid of app data and just say theme. So we're going to set it to the current theme, and we're going to run this anytime theme changes. On this other one, what we're going to do is we're going to call set theme, and we're going to pass it actually, we're just going to pass it get item, I believe. That looks about right. Let me just make this a little bit simpler to see here. There we go. And then same thing with this one. I'm only doing one thing in this use effect, so might as well just put it all in one line. All right, so that should take care of the things that I was doing. Well, I'll have to copy this too, right? I need to get this. I need to put that in here also, which is okay because I'm already using use media predicate in here. So I'm just going to put this right here for now. And what this will do is it'll get the user's preferred theme on their computer. And you can set that on a Mac with inside of your settings right here. And we'll test that out in a few minutes whenever we get the entire app working. Let's go back and look how this was being set. So it was doing this or that. So I believe what we need to do is set theme and get one or the other. Let's go ahead and break that out on its new line. So that, I'm thinking this should work. So when it first runs, and Frame, remember, it encapsulates the entire application. It should be only running once. It's not ever being unmounted. So this will work fine. And by not having any anything in our array here, it should only run the first time that this frame component runs, or when it's unmounted, which should never happen. And then here, every time it's changed, we'll go ahead and set that local storage. Great. So I think that we've got everything done here in Frame. We can get rid of use context. We don't need that anymore. And yeah. All right. So moving on kind of to the next thing, which was, I believe, the side nav. We need to update this one now. So now that we kind of understand that, things are going to get really easy as we start to change things here. Again, get rid of app context. And here we're going to do, here we only need to read nav open. So we don't need to do the destructuring, and we can do use recoil value. So this is a new one. We haven't used this one yet. I'll also get rid of our context up here. Oops. Lead React. So now nav open, and just get rid of the context dot. That page is done, right? Oops, we actually have to say nav open recoil, bring that guy in, right? So this page is done. Side nav is now using recoil to subscribe to the context through our atoms. Next page is about the about.js. All right. Now this page was using some text that said the current theme is whatever. And this was more of just something that I'd kind of set up to kind of show how to take a current value and put in one style or another based on like a value. But we actually created a selector that will give us exactly what we need here. So let me go up here. Oops. Let me get rid of this. And then we're going to put a value right here from our selector. So first we need to come in here, do const theme text. We'll call it theme text. And that will do, so here we're just going to use recoil value again, right? Because we're only getting the value. We're not trying to set it in any way. So that'll bring that in. And now here, oops, we have to actually give it, again, the name. So this is going to be theme text recoil. There, bring that one in. And now use our theme text right here. So now anytime that theme changes, we're going to have a derived value that will be that text that was there before. But now we're getting it from a selector and not just using context and bringing that in and wrapping the words around it. Okay, we have two more components we need to update. That'll be the footer. And this one is actually using change theme. So right when we click the switch, that little Kendo React switch down here, let's go ahead and open this guy up a little bit so you can see what's going on. So whenever the switch is clicked, handle theme is going to get triggered. And whatever context dot theme or whatever theme is currently, it's going to pass either dark or light to it. So let's first get rid of some of the stuff we don't need up here. And we're going to bring in, for this one, we're going to say const. So what we want to use is theme, and we're just going to use the value. Actually, we're going to do theme, and we're going to do, instead of set theme, what we're actually going to do is change theme. This way we don't have to change anything on our page, right? Because this second one can be whatever you want it to be. The norm is to call it set theme, but we're going to do change theme. And then we're going to use recoil state, right? Because we want to be able to use the value and be able to change the value. And then here we'll do theme recoil. So bring both of those in. And now just get rid of anything that's using context dot. And no offense to Context API if you're listening, buddy, but what we're, Recoil is still using you underneath the hood, so don't feel left out. All right, I think that takes care of the footer page, and we just have one more, a similar page as the footer, where we're reading, I think, and setting the value. Let's see here. No, I think we're just setting it. So we get to use one more different hook from Recoil. So what we're going to do is we're going to say toggle side nav. Actually, do I need both of them? Am I using this somewhere else? Okay, so we'll do toggle side nav equals use recoil. Is it recoil? Before I used, let's go back and consult their documentation real quick, see what the name is for it. Docs. Open this guy up a little bit. API reference. Core hooks. So use set recoil state. All right. Use set recoil state. Perfect. And then on this one, it'll be I guess nav open recoil. Toggle side nav. Now we can just get rid of context dot. And I actually didn't use, I am using them both. Well, good thing I showed you how to use set recoil state, but we actually are going to have to bring in nav open and actually wrap this and destructure it. Sorry about that. And then now we'll just be doing use recoil state and change this also. All right, moment of truth. We walked through, we replaced all the places where I was using those global pieces of state. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to run our application and see. I'm going to stop it, and I'm actually going to delete this context and rebuild it so that we just know for sure we're not using that anywhere. Usually I have music in the back of my streams. Today we just have construction workers outside beating on the walls. Hopefully you guys don't hear that and it's bothering you. All right, so it seems like we might have missed something. Let's go check what we're doing here. Use effect is not defined. That makes sense. So on our frame, I believe on our frame, we've used use effect down here, which we weren't using before. Hopefully that brings it in. Nope. I gotta do it myself. All right, so now that should make everything kosher. Perfect. All right, so the app's loaded, that's good. Now let's actually change the theme. and it works. Great. Let's go over here, make this smaller. Uh-oh. So something's not working here. Let's go figure out what that is. So that is the nav open. For really quick, I'm just going to close everything because it's getting a lot of things open here. Let's go to the menu.js. Oh, we missed one of these. Yep, that'll do it. So now save and go back. And hopefully now it should open and close. Great. So again, we didn't do, oh, let's also check one more thing. On the About page, see, the theme is dark. And when we change it, it'll actually move over to the other side and it'll say theme is light. So that's the derived value that we created with the selector. So we've covered atoms and selectors, which are pretty much the bulk of what you're going to be using Recoil.js for. Now, this is very simple stuff. What I would tell you is that the real reason for using Recoil.js, let's say that you, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on this yet, but I would assume that if you have, let's say that we are using Kendo React's big data grid, right, where you can load hundreds and hundreds of rows in, and we had, in that grid, you can do all sorts of cool things, like you can insert like whole other tables and stuff. But what if we had things that only got changed in like every other row, or maybe 5 out of the 100 rows, and we wanted to be able to update those? We would have to do some pretty crazy stuff with Context API in order to make that happen. Recoil.js, I think, makes it possible to do those things very easily. Another thing that you can also do that I haven't tried yet is kind of creating like an array of atoms on the fly. So you can just imagine kind of what I've shown you here, all the additional things that you can do with Recoil.js. And what I'd like to do in the next week or two is actually do a live stream on my Twitch, twitch.com/HTTPjunkie. And I'd like to do a kind of like a more advanced Recoil.js where I bring in some big long array of, of stuff, and we're using Recoil to kind of manage the state changing in those different places. But what I would suggest here is, again, go out and check out Recoil, go through the to-do application and try it out. There are a couple good YouTube videos out there already. Most of them just go over the basics. But I think there was one by Eric Wynn that actually was pretty good. He goes over a lot of the things that you can do with Recoil. The problem with that video is that the audio was cutting out and everything. So I'm hoping we get some more advanced videos coming out on Recoil.js soon so that I can learn as well. So that kind of concludes our Recoil app, or our app that uses Recoil. And I hope that you understand that using Recoil is as simple as using React hooks and using useState. In fact, it's as easy as using useState, and it's not even as complex as using like useReducer. But anyways, I digress. And we will go ahead and close this guy out. And I don't really need this anymore either. So the next thing we're going to go over, if we do have any questions, I'll try to answer what I can. But literally everything that I know about Recoil.js, I just showed you, and showed you in the context of an application, an application using Context API, in which we switched all that stuff out. So the next thing we're going to do, and I ran a little bit long on that one, but I think we'll still have plenty of time, and we're trying to keep this to an hour. We don't want to make it too long for you guys. But a lot of people in the React community ask me, and I've done some streams on it, how to get started with a full stack React GraphQL Express application, kind of, or they don't even ask that kind of question. It's just like, how do you use kind of GraphQL on both the server and the client side? And so what this application here is that I'm going to run for you is a few things. So first of all, we are using Couchbase on the back end. What is Couchbase? It is a database. It is similar to databases like Mongo and DynamoDB and Cosmos and stuff like that. What it is it's a key value store for the most part. Your keys are, like, for instance, here is an airline, and its value is an actual JSON document. And so what we do is whenever you install Couchbase Server, you can install some of these sample buckets, which have, and this is my favorite one because it has a whole lot of information like airlines, airports, hotels, actual flight paths, and all this stuff. And so you can build kind of like a travel booking application based off of this sample data set. And actually that's what we've done over at Couchbase is we have some sample applications that do just that, allow you to do fuzzy searches for an airline or a city and kind of connect the two and buy a flight, that kind of thing, book a flight. So what we're going to do is we don't going to do much with the database because we know a few things, and that is that airlines have this structure right here. And for what this application is going to do, that's really all we need to know. Now, I'm going to move this off the screen, and I'm going to go over really quick what this application is. So at the very root of the application, you have an NPM package. Let me close these up here. So you have an NPM package, and the only thing I have at the root is this package concurrently. And what concurrently does is allow me to run my client and my server application at the same time. So if you want to do something like this, basically it's as easy as installing concurrently and creating these two different scripts that both start the client and the server separately. One other thing that I've thrown in here is that when someone clones this repo on their computer and they run npm install, what it's going to do is at the root level, it's going to install concurrently. And then after that install, we're going to give it some instructions. We're going to say, hey, go into the server directory and install that. And also go into the client directory and install that one. So when someone pulls down my repo, all they have to do is npm install, and that'll install packages at each level, right? Because this client and this server could run independently. They don't have to be in this one project. But I've packaged it all together so that you can see it all working in one project. Now, this client application is kind of similar to the one that I just showed you, except I don't have that separation between my app and my frame. I kind of have all the frame stuff right here in the app. But that's okay because this is a very simple application. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a few components, and one of them will be an airline component. And in that airline component, you're going to have a list of airlines on the left-hand side, and you're going to have a list of airline details on the right-hand side. When you first get to this page, nothing will show here. It'll just show the list on the left. When you click on one of the airlines, it'll load the details on the right-hand side. On this airline details, oh, that doesn't work. On the airline details, you'll notice that if no data has been passed to that component, it's just going to say, hey, select an airline. Otherwise, if data has been passed to it, it's going to print out the details for that airline. And then on the left-hand side will be our airline list. And all it really is a list of list items, an unordered list, and some pagination at the bottom. Now, the pagination is all done in React. If you want to check out how that's done, you can go into the utilities and check out the pagination. And then here, we're kind of iterating over all of our LIs. So for every airline that's showing, we're going to map those out onto the page and show them here. Pretty simple. You can look more into kind of how all this is done by drilling into these pages and kind of seeing how it's done. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. Airlines comes in, and we're actually, depending on where the pagination, what page you're on, it's just slicing that set of airlines and showing only I think 10 at a time. Our homepage really has nothing on it. The interesting thing I would show you is here. One of the other ways that we're going to achieve this master detail page is that when you come to the airline page at first, this is what's going to resolve this route right here. So it's going to call the airline's route, and basically no data will be passed to it. Now, if an ID exists, you're actually it's going to pass that through our route, and then our page will actually be able to match on that ID and show the actual, what airline did we click on, and then that gets sent over. We kind of map through it or filter that list of airlines and find the one that we've selected, and then we can show that data on the right-hand side. So we have a pretty good idea of how this React application runs so far, and we'll run the application in a moment. One more thing I'll show you is we have this higher order component called with Apollo provider. So since I've made this, I've kind of realized that this is not probably the best way to use the Apollo provider, but for an example where I'm trying to show and keep all my code clean for a demo, it actually works out pretty well for me. What happens is that whatever component I want to use this high order component with, it's just going to wrap around the component, and it's going to provide the Apollo client data to that component. Now, I think where this can kind of blow up is if you start using different GraphQL, endpoints. It might be better to use federation instead of kind of this, instead of doing it this way, but that's neither here nor there. We're only using one GraphQL endpoint for this application, so it should not be a problem at all. Now, let's go check out the server real quick. So the server is just a very simple one page, and we're actually leveraging Express GraphQL. So it's an Express application, and Express GraphQL gives us this GraphQL HTTP. And without going into too much about what that does, it allows us to kind of define a schema, very briefly here, and then for each of these queries that we have, so we have two different queries in this application. This server is going to take care of getting the data for all airlines in the UK, and this is kind of the implementation of that, sub endpoint or whatever GraphQL endpoint for Airlines UK will be. It'll go out to our Couchbase server, and this is how we'll query it. So you're probably wondering, that's a little bit weird. So you've got a document database, a NoSQL database, but I'm seeing some SQL here. What's up with that? So this is actually a variant or an implementation of SQL++. And what SQL++ is it's the same guy who kind of created SQL. He has created kind of like the ability to create other SQL variants that will actually work with document databases, NoSQL databases. So for very simple queries like we're doing now, this is actually absolutely no different than a regular SQL query. Now, and what we call it at Couchbase is this is called Nickel, N1QL. And so you can go check out all that stuff on your own. But basically what we're doing is we're calling into the Couchbase bucket. Our Couchbase bucket is simply that collection of data that I showed you earlier. We are connecting to it using this CB user and CB pass that we've gotten from our .env file. This is a nice little trick too. If you use the package .env, you can easily set up like this, a file with your username and password. And on your git ignore, you can tell it to not upload .envs to your repo. And this way, I could put this code up online for someone and potentially not include that .env file. And that way, my username and password never goes out to the world. So then when someone else downloads it, they'd create their own .env and put their own username and password there. Cool. So as we move on, we've got two queries. Airlines UK, here's the implementation for it. We're using some SQL to go fetch that. One of the things I will point out here is we're actually creating our own promises here. One of the older versions of Couchbase, the Node.js Couchbase package, actually you had to do that. In some of the newer ones, you don't have to. There's an issue with the new package, I hate to say, but that's why I'm using 2 patches before for this demo. But just know that you don't have to kind of do all this in the new versions of Couchbase for Node. Now, if you just want to get one single airline, you can call airline by key. And as we saw before in our database, I'll have to pull it up again here. Our IDs for our airlines are simply airline, which is the type, along with the underscore ID. So we can fetch any one airline without using the overhead that Nickel and SQL for JSON require by just using the get by key API that's already part of Couchbase. So we can say collection.get, we can pass in that key, and we'll get just that one record back. Now, we're not using that in our React application. I just threw it in here. So if anyone wanted to know how to do it, they have like, here's how to get like multiple documents. Here's how to get one single document. And that's about as far as we're going for our GraphQL API. We're not going to go too much deeper than that. Once you understand how to do stuff like this, you can also do mutations, queries, and whatever you want with GraphQL. Again, these are it's a shallow dive into the entire kind of full stack JavaScript application. Down here, all we have to do is specify a server port and a URL for our GraphQL. Pass in, here's GraphQL HTTP doing some heavy lifting for us, taking our schema and the root. So these are both defined here and here. And just kind of taking that and doing all the hard work for us to create that GraphQL server. Finally, when we run, it'll give us a nice little message so we can click on and see our GraphQL API using something like Graphical, which is here. And let me make this a little bit smaller. And we're going to run this in a minute. This won't work right now because it's not running. Let me pull this down a little bit here. All right. Now remember, typically we'd have to go into Couchbase GQL server and run node server. We have to go into React Apollo client and run npm start there. So what I've done is I've set up some scripts like I showed you before, that if I just run npm start at the root directory, it'll concurrently run both the server and the client. Great, that'll be awesome for us. We don't have to run them each separately. So let's cross our fingers and hope this works. All right, there it is, spinning up both of them, node server, npm start, separately. And here we will see a few things. Let's go ahead and put these all together. So here's our React app, but before we go into that, let's check out our GraphQL real quick. So here, again, get airlines UK. Oh, let's hope that this is working correctly. Oh no, I had a feeling this might, let's see here. npm run build. Oops, npm npm build. Oh. Let's see if that fixes it. So I had this issue earlier. Hopefully it's not a problem. Let's go check this guy real quick. Okay, that works. Now let's back up and run it from the root again. And npm start again. Hopefully this will clear that issue up. Again, I think the last time I ran this, I was on a different version of npm and node. There we go. Great. So if we go back to our GraphQL, again, by calling query get airlines UK, we're getting all these airlines. We can decide to leave some of these off, and boom, we don't have to transfer as much over the wire. That's what's kind of great about GraphQL. We can hit it all by one GraphQL endpoint and then just specify the queries here. One of the things that I'll do real quick is we'll show you how to just fetch one airline by itself. Let's see here. I'm going to grab some code that I've already got copied over here. All right, so instead of getting all airlines, what we can do is we can get airline by key. And then down here, we can do ID, and well, I think 112. Yeah, let's gotta put quotes around this guy. So this will pass a query variable along to the query, and that'll be the ID. And so this should try to go grab airline underscore ID. Why? Because our implementation of this, as we can see here, whenever we call this, it's going to take some data. That'll be the ID, or it'll take some data, and then we'll say data ID and append that to airline underscore. Then we'll pass that in when we call the Couchbase server, and it should retrieve only one file for us. So let's try that out. And there it is. Cool. And then, of course, just like the other query, we can decide what things we want to pull out of there. Now, when we go over to the React application, we see that we've got our home page and we've got our airlines. And when you have an airline, you have a list of them here on the left. You can paginate through them, right? And see all the different ones. These are all the UK airlines. And as we click on one, you're going to see that it passes the ID up here to the as a URL parameter. And then let's go and see how that's actually being taken care of here. So here's our airlines page. So what's happening is our airlines page, which is the entire page, right? And then this component on the left and this component on the right are being loaded into it. It's taking that match.params that's provided to us from the React router context API, and we're able to say, hey, match params ID. We're able to get a number out of that, and then we're able to down here, we're able to go through and do an airlines.find and kind of filter out, find that one airline that we're looking for, and then that's going to be saved in a variable called airline. And then airline is going to always be passed into the airline details. When the app first loads and you're on the page, when there is no ID being passed, then that's kind of a null value. And so again, our details page over here is getting nothing, and it just knows to render this, right? We got a little ternary setup here. It says, hey, airline exists? If so, do this. Otherwise, do this. So right now we're getting select an airline on the right, right? And then, of course, whenever we click on one, that is no longer the case. An airline now exists and is now being passed through with a proper number. And then what we're able to do is, actually not a proper number, an object is coming through. And we're able to display that object on the right-hand side here. 1 hour. We hit it right on the nose, Patrick. So at this point, you've seen all of this. The one thing I will throw up here for a minute. Patrick, do we have any questions? Do you have any questions? Did I not cover anything?
We had a question about Recoil, but we'll take it after.
Okay. Well, no, I pretty much.
Okay.
I pretty much have this done. I'll try to answer whatever I can with Recoil, but most of what I told you is already out there. I will just show real quick the React app base that we used. You guys can take it, do whatever you want with it. Be careful. There are some Kendo React components in there. You can't use that in a production without getting a license from them. But we also have this application here is right here. It's called Rage with Couchbase Final. So this will be a YouTube video. You can always pause this. But here is the link to the React app base. That does not use Create React App. It's kind of a hand-rolled kind of React application. Pretty much production ready, a starter at least. Anyways, you can start with this app and kind of build your way out of it, or build something out of it. And then here is the Rage with Couchbase Final. The Rage stands for React, Apollo, GraphQL, and Express. And of course, we're using Couchbase along with it.
Rage.
Cool.
That sounds like fun.
The Rage stack, if you will. I coined it, but I doubt it will catch on. But I mean, think about it though. What we are doing in a lot of applications is we are kind of using that stack, and it doesn't really matter what your database is. Yeah, I'm here to pimp out Couchbase a little bit and talk about it, But you don't have to use Couchbase. You can use Mongo, DynamoDB, and just change out like that little implementation there of how we connect it to the database and how we're actually calling it, and use your own implementation there. The GraphQL part doesn't change at all. So a lot of what people are using is React, GraphQL, Apollo, and Express all together. So if you can spell something cooler than Rage with it, let me know.
I like Rage.
Okay, cool. We're going with Rage.
So, we have one question from my best friend, and he said, about Recoil, he asked, are we able to prevent re-renders in cases when we have nested object atom and we change just some property within the atom, which most of the components are not interested in?
So when you change just one property in the atom, each atom only has one property, I think. I'm not sure. So if under the hood, Recoil is just, so if you look at their page here, if you go to the docs, I thought it was here, motivation. Somewhere it says, hey, all Recoil relies on React. And not only does it rely on React, but it relies on React hooks and the new context API. So most of the things that you can do, if you can do these things within a React application and using state and effects and everything already, then you should be able to do it with Recoil. Recoil is kind of an extraction around that stuff. And it does give you more tools. Again, above and beyond what I've shown you, I don't know a lot about. Can you actually read the question one more time?
Yeah. So, are we able to prevent re-renders in case when we have nested object atom and we change just some property within the atom, which most of the components are not interested in?
That is the entire purpose for Recoil. I'm almost positive. I'm not trying to answer that in like a snooty way or anything, but because a lot of us don't know what Recoil is. But if you were to go and kind of watch the React Europe talk, that is kind of exactly what he's talking about. And one of the other guys kind of touches on this as well. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I can never remember how to spell win, but it's Eric and something like that. Eric Nguyen, Recoil. Let's see here. Oops, spelled it wrong. Oh, man. Oops, I should do Recoiljs. Anyways, there is a video that Eric Wynn did. And he kind of goes over that as well. And I'm still kind of going through that video and trying to understand. It's right here. First look into Recoil and state management in React. So what he actually does is, if you get in here a little bit, right, he's got an application set up, I think how the user is asking this question, where he's got like an array of all these different things. He's got two different lists that kind of where places where you can change like the color of the border box around them. And what happens is that you've got this component with all these other sub components that subscribe to specific pieces of state. And when one changes, the other ones don't, and you don't have to re-render the others. So I would assume that kind of the answer to that is yes. Mm-hmm. I would check out this video though. My only criticism of this video is that there are some issues where the audio cuts out and it's kind of hard to understand what he's saying. Other than that, I think this is one of the best videos so far, kind of probably other than what we've done here today, which kind of takes Recoil and shows you how to apply it to an existing application. I'll be honest, when we did the React Europe, and I watched the video once before we went on air and then once during it, I was still kind of confused as to what exactly Recoiljs did. And I didn't really understand it until I watched the Egghead video, which kind of showed very easily how do you use Recoil state, Recoil value, Recoil set state. And then it all clicked immediately like, oh, like I can just, like at the very basic, I can just replace my context API out with this. But in reality, that's not the best use of Recoil. The use for it is kind of doing applications like this, where you have like, and also being able to create atoms on the fly and kind of have functions that kind of create an array of atoms, like you know, in line and kind of on the fly, and then those atoms are different pieces of state that, if changed, kind of automatically update wherever they are and nowhere else. So that's kind of how I see it. There's a lot of learning to do here and kind of understanding how to best apply Recoil. Would I suggest someone with an app like I showed before going out and replacing it with Recoil? I don't know. I don't know if what I ended up with before I started and after I showed you guys what I did, if my app was any better. It seems like I now have more overhead because I brought in Recoiljs. So I assume that's not the best use for it. But it is, as far as showing people how to use it, a very good kind of way to kind of help them understand how to use it and how to start using it in their application so that they can go and do more advanced things with it, which hopefully I can do some more videos on.
Nice. So you showed us how
and
to build.
Kind of the final thing that I'll show. So, oops, go to the latest. So when it comes to using Couchbase, you're probably going to, if you want to know how to get up and start with it really quickly, here is, I just actually redid this documentation page just the other day. And we actually walked through kind of creating a Node.js application, installing the Couchbase SDK, and doing some basic queries on that travel sample bucket. Now, this doesn't use GraphQL, but it is kind of like a vanilla Express application. Actually, a vanilla Node.js application. It doesn't even have Express. And it just shows you kind of how to use Couchbase. And then here, I just fixed this documentation page also and put some better examples in here. Again, you're seeing that I'm not using that promise anymore, that wrapping or doing the promise work myself. So yeah, I would, if you want to check out more about Couchbase, you can go here as well. Recoil, you can go here and check it out. And then, oh, here's the basic tutorial. Great. It's this section assumes you have installed Recoil, and they're going to walk you through creating a to-do application. The cool thing about this is when you get into, let's see, selectors. I'm going to go one more in. Is there a next? There should be a next on the top of the page too. So synchronous and asynchronous. So in your selector, right, you can make your selector get information that might rely on, like, I guess a call to an API or something. And so you might want to actually create an asynchronous selector. Let's see, what else do we have here? Error handling. And so you start to get into a lot more advanced stuff. So what I can kind of promise everybody is that by next week, by the time I do my Twitch stream next week, and I don't know what happened here. I guess they're not finished with the with the tutorial yet. But I'm going to go through all this and try and devise, or kind of maybe make my application that I just created, make it a little bit more advanced. Maybe put a data grid in there or something and kind of show a more advanced example of where, hey, we actually have a reason for using Recoiljs now, not just replacing the context API boilerplate with it to manage a few global properties, right?
Nice. And
cool.
Which library do you use to connect to the Couchbase?
Anything else?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, are you on mute? See, it looks like Patrick has frozen. Oh, there he goes.
Can you hear me?
I think you're on mute. I can see you moving around, but I can't hear you. I will say that, I mean, that's pretty much everything that I have to show. Again, I'll kind of show you what this YouTube video is here. Again, I think one of the better ones so far. We also have the egghead.io Recoil JS.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, where is that one at? Recoiljs. Forgot how I found the egghead one. Huh. But anyways, there definitely is. Oh, it's a Medium article.
Okay, I can hear myself on
Here
YouTube,
we go.
so I think
the
problem
state
is
of Recoiljs. Yeah, I still can't hear you, Patrick. So this one here has some links at the bottom, up and running with Recoil. If you click on that guy, you can go over to Egghead. And I'm not sure if this is showing up for me to watch because I have an Egghead subscription or not, but I think that these are free videos to watch. And there's only 3 of them. And it may not be any more than what we kind of showed you today, but what you can do is probably watch Egghead for more content coming out on Recoil if you're interested in that. Anyways, I think that's all we have to go over. I'm assuming, can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if there's any more questions? Probably a thumbs down. Cool. All right. So I can't really hear Patrick. I would assume that he wants you to click on the subscribe link so that you get notified of all the React Europe Hangouts that are going to be coming and any new content. And hopefully we see all of our React friends next year at React Europe, maybe in person, hopefully. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and end this one. And thanks everyone for coming out and watching the stream. And have a good day.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Eric. Bye-bye.